Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to Lit Chick. I'm your host, Alex Hoops, and we are here with Sonya Lalli. Very excited today to have you here. If you have questions for Sonya about her book, A Holly Jolly Diwali, please add them to the chat, and we're going to have a really fabulous conversation. I'm going to take a second to introduce Sonya to you all. Sonya Lalli is a Canadian writer of Indian heritage. She studied law, in her hometown of Saskatoon and at Columbia University in New York. She completed an MA in publishing at City University of London. Sonya has a black belt in Taekwondo and loves travel, yoga, and cocktail bartending. She lives in Toronto with her husband. Sonya, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me.
Taekwondo. I love that in your bio.
Thanks. Yeah, it feels like an eternity ago.
Yeah, it's been a while since you've hit the boards. I don't know what
exactly.
Sure. Well, we're really excited to have you here this fall. I think I've said that Lit Chick is doing holidays forever. I love the tinsel and the glitter and all of the desserts. So could you tell us a little bit about Holly Jolly Diwali?
Sure. So A Holly Jolly Diwali, which is right here, is my fourth book. And it is a multicultural holiday romance that straddles both Christmas and Diwali. It's about a woman much like myself who loves Christmas, who loves Western holidays, but also really, really loves her own culture's holidays like Diwali. So the book is about Nikki. She's 29. She lives in Seattle. And she's a really good girl, always done the right thing, but she gets laid off. And so on a very last minute decision, she decides to go to her friend's wedding in India, which she'd said no to previously. So she goes to Mumbai, and right at the first day is Diwali. So she happens to land there on the holiday. And at the Diwali party, she meets a guy named Sam, and they have a whirlwind romance. And that is the start of the book.
Awesome. I love it so much. I love that there's this big trip. Nikki has very much a YOLO energy that I think I really love throughout the book. She's just I gotta go. It takes a little bit, but I was very proud of her when she decided to get on the plane. And obviously going to an Indian wedding is a dream of mine. If there are any Desi people or Indian folks getting married soon, hook a girl up. I will be your friend.
They are so fun pre-COVID times.
I know. It's probably really hard, especially I think that you mentioned that Dia's wedding has 1,500 people at it or something like that.
Yeah. That's
not probably super COVID safe, but God willing, we will return to a time when we can have these 4 or 5 day big experiences. So first I want to talk, because it's in the title, this is really a book about Christmas, but it's also about Diwali. So I wonder whether you can explain for our viewers a little bit about what that holiday is, if they're not familiar already.
Sure. So Diwali is usually takes place in October, November. This year it's falling on November 4th, and it's really the festival of lights. And there's lots of different cultures and religions, people of different faith. They all celebrate it in so many different ways. Because it's very widespread. And so that's kind of touched upon in the book in different ways different people celebrate Diwali. But to me, it's essentially, the light, celebrating the light in this world over the dark, or the good over the bad, which is really the crux of I think of a lot of holidays, is just celebrating the goodness in the world. So that's really what it's about to me. But of course, there's all these amazing traditions, like lighting these diya, which are small candles, exchanging food and sweets. And of course, for a lot of us, drinking and dancing and celebrating and stuff.
Yeah, it was great to learn about it. And I think what's so impactful in this book is that Nikki, our protagonist, is also really trying to learn about it too. And she's asking all these various people, what is this about? And everybody has a different answer. But I love that the main takeaway is, celebrating goodness, celebrating light. It seems like such a fun time, and definitely part of the holiday season if it's happening in the fall, right? Spill over to Christmas time.
Totally,
yeah. So I wanted to first talk about Nikki a little bit, so our viewers can understand sort of where she's coming from in the book, right? She's very much a type A person. That's right there in the book copy, right? She always does everything right. She's the good girl. She lives at home. She loves her parents. She tries to make good decisions whenever possible. And so when she is laid off, she's really presented with this choice of am I gonna just stay in the grind and stay in Seattle, or am I going to take a chance? Right. And her first night in Mumbai, she sees someone who kind of helps her come out of her shell. So I was wondering if you could kind of pitch us Sam a little bit, who is such a hunk. I am a big fan of musicians, of course. My fiance is a guitarist, so
oh, very nice.
I really like understood and locked in all of your descriptions of what it's like to watch somebody on stage have that performance charisma. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Sam.
Sure. Well, Nikki is, like, as you said, she makes really good decisions, and her only serious boyfriend, and it comes out in the book, has been someone who is really good on paper.
Yeah.
A nice guy who seems to check all the boxes, who she can kind of see as a husband. Whereas when she meets Sam, even though he's also, Indian, he is really carefree. He's really sexy. He's really different than her. He sort of lives very passionately, and he brings out that side in her. And what another great thing about Sam is that he is, like you said, he's a hunk, right? He lives in London. He plays the bass guitar. He's a musician. I really wanted to write, an Indian hero who sort of defied a lot of stereotypes of what we sometimes may expect, a guy to be like. So it was really fun to do. It's fun to do that as well.
Totally. He comes across great. And I was going to ask you, I'm always interested in the writing process, and it feels like Sam's music plays a big role in this book, right? He is part of the shoegaze genre. I know, because I've got a music boyfriend, exactly what that was. I love that you mentioned My Bloody Valentine. I was like, oh, this is like a thing that exists outside of like my relationship situation. But I was curious, like, were you listening to something in specific while you were drafting this character? Like, did he come about naturally, or did you have to kind of find him?
Well, I knew that I wanted them both to be passionate about music, but to come from different places. So it was a bit of a mix. Like, I, like Nikki, played the piano when I was younger. I would, lots of classical music. I wouldn't consider myself as like expert as Nikki is, but I came from that more like reserved place. But then there's also a side of me, and my husband also, was in the high school rock band and plays the guitar as well. And so, we listen to a lot of really different music, like a huge range, for everything from, his like very weird to me music to like Taylor Swift, who I really love. So, so it was kind of like exploring that range and doing a little bit of research, listening to lots of different Spotify playlists. And then I kind of settled on this persona of what kind of music he would like and how that would play into the book.
Yeah, I like it. It's such a contrast. And I love that there's a very like romantic moment to me where Nikki plays for him. There's something about sharing your creative side with somebody, or sharing your hobby or your passion, that's very intimate. And so I thought that scene where Nikki plays piano is very, very romantic,
Oh,
thanks. I like that a lot. So, and then the other big, like, kind of inspiration, there's the music, right? But then there's this big trip to India, which is what kind of the entire book revolves around. And Nikki has never been before, which I think was really an interesting element. I have, Indian friends who go every other year to visit grandparents and their aunties and uncles. But I also, there are people who've never been back home. And maybe there's an assumption that people who may live like very Indian cultural lives here in the States or in Canada have been back, but Nikki's never been there. And I think it's fascinating to watch her see it for the first time, right? See the traffic, see the people, try the food. I have to ask, like, have you been, first of all? And then how did you know, like, where you wanted to go in India? It's a huge country. So where was the research for that?
Yeah, so I drew a lot of my own experiences for writing Nikki's journey to India, and also this journey of discovering her identity of being Indian, but not having ever been there or grown up there. Yeah, so for me, I've been to India. I was born in Canada. Been to India maybe 4 or 5 times, most of those as an adult. The most recent time was, just a year before the pandemic. I actually went to Mumbai for my friend's big Indian wedding. So that was part of the inspiration. And it was, it's such an interesting conversation because, I have opinions about India. I have prejudice about India. Just because I have an Indian heritage doesn't mean that those are aligned. I don't know if I'm being clear, but I guess it's an interesting balance because I am Indian, but I'm not Indian at the same time. And so where does that leave me in terms of my identity? And that's a question that Nikki explores throughout the novel, and one where it comes to realize, well, you know what? We're all different. We get to define our own identity, and we get to be happy with who we are. So that's part of her journey for sure. So Nikki is of Punjabi background.
Right.
And she's, she grew up practicing the Sikh faith. Whereas the hero, Sam, he is Hindu and is Bengali. And actually, I chose those two backgrounds because I am of those mixed backgrounds myself.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I'm half-half. So it was really nice to kind of explore both those avenues in these two characters.
Yeah, it was very much interesting to learn about as somebody who's interested in learning about the culture. This is such a great read for folks who want to learn more. Indian culture is not monolithic. There are millions of different ethnic and religious subgroups. So it was really interesting for me to learn about. And this is such a good book too. I think that there's this term like third culture kids, right? Of people who grow up in a Western background, but with another kind of culture at home. And yes, everybody's experience is really complicated. And throughout the book, Sonya, you included like these flashbacks to Nikki's childhood, predominantly adolescence, where she's encountering kind of these moments of othering that I thought really helped to kind of showcase her time in India as well. So we get to see Mumbai. I want to talk about Goa a little bit too, because I think, we've seen some of Goa in like Western popular culture, but could you explain to us what this amazing like beach area is like? Have you been yourself?
Okay. No, so I've been to everywhere described in the book except for Goa. And that's part because I wrote this during the pandemic, and I was hoping to go to India again, but of course that, wasn't really possible.
Right.
But like I think a lot of us, I'd heard so much about Goa as this like sort of dream destination. It's in India, and it's like by the beach, and it's just this wonderful, very fascinating historical part that sort of is a lot different than other parts of India. So I did a lot of research and watched a lot of YouTube videos and talked to a lot of people who'd been there for my research, but it's definitely on my list to go as soon as travel is, happening
open
more.
again. Absolutely. After reading Holly Jolly Diwali, I want to book my ticket too. It was fascinating, this combination of sort of the more traditional Indian culture, but also with Portuguese colonial culture, just like a really complicated, interesting place. So I think it's also so perfect, like you said, in the pandemic, when people are so eager to travel but unable to do so, that we're particularly drawn to these books because they provide an escape that we might not be able to get, right? It's like a mini vacation.
Exactly.
Definitely. So I wanted to ask you, Sonya, because we have a lot of folks at Blaze who are working on writing themselves or interested in publishing. You've published so many books. It seems like rather quickly, although I know from the back end, the process is much, much longer. But I'd love to know like a little bit about your process, if you're open to sharing that. Like how many months did this particular book take? How did this idea come about for you?
Sure. So, I mean, so this is my fourth book, and every book has been very, very different. Like, the Matchmaker's List was the first one. That was years in the making, right? Like, and you put so much of yourself, and it's the first book that goes out into the world. It's just a whole different experience. The second and third books, I wrote a little bit quicker, but still not that quick because I worked full time. Yeah. And so it was really, and, I was kind of, after work and on the weekends, on my kitchen table, writing those. And so that was a different process. A Holly Jolly Diwali, I wrote, that was probably the fastest I've written a book. I think I wrote the first draft in 3.5 months or 4, but that was only because I wrote it during the pandemic. And I'd just gone down to working part-time. So there was more, I could put more of myself into the book. I don't know about any of you, but you know, when I'm working full time and also writing, it often takes me so long to get back into the headspace where I was in. Where it's like, okay, what was I really thinking? Like, and then you have to reread a lot or just sit there for a while to get back into the writing. Whereas, you know, I was really lucky for this book. It was the first time where, you know, I could go to bed with, you know, close my computer, wake up, and I had the, you know, often the flexibility to immediately open the computer and go right back to where I was. So that allowed for a lot more of a flow, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic was obviously horrible for a lot of reasons, but I think for writers, there was a bit of an advantage in the fact that you were able to be productive in a different way. I think everybody sort of got their pandemic book. And also, I think I was speaking about this last week with Jean Meltzer, that writing during the pandemic could also be a really lovely distraction, right? From everything that's going on. It feels like, okay, I have control over this manuscript. I have control over what happens to these characters. And outside, there's so much that I can't control. So
absolutely. And I mean, and it's not always going to flow. I mean, like everyone else, I'm sure, especially in those early days, you know, I wasn't productive at my job, let alone writing. And I couldn't, you know, not watch the news, and it was too much. But then there are other times when you're like, you know what, you're able to separate yourself from the real world. And, you know, when you're lucky enough to be able to do that, however briefly, it can really just be a good experience and distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you know when you started the book, I mean, what elements came to you first? Was it really important to write a holiday book, did you feel like, or was the location first? I'm curious.
So I had started writing. It's sitting, you know, the first 15,000 words are somewhere in my hard drive. A completely different book. But then last year, I kind of thought, you know, what about a Diwali, like a holiday Diwali romance? And so I messaged my editor and asked her what she thought about that, and she's like, yeah. So I switched gears. That's stowed away for an indefinite amount of time, and so it started off with the idea of I wanted to write a book about Diwali and Christmas, and so from there, I thought, okay, how could this story work? What could the plot be? And I'd always wanted to write a book about a woman like me going to India and experiencing that. So I thought, oh, okay, that would be an interesting like holiday as well, and about identity and finding love on vacation. So
yeah. I love it. It's perfect. It's a holiday in the sense of it being a vacation and a holiday for her to experience this too. And I love the Christmas element as well. And, you know, I'm Jewish, but I definitely do experience Christmas. I think that it's hard not to. And I absolutely love it. And I think that, you know, finding ways to interact with these traditions in a way that's meaningful to you is important.
Yeah. Totally. And I mean, I can't remember who, but at some point in the book, someone says, you know, religion, Nikki was encouraged to look at religion as an all you can eat buffet. And I mean, I know that's definitely not everybody's approach, but I think for some people it definitely is, especially like for someone like me. I grew up with, you know, exposed to two different religions, but also to, you know, the Christian religion, which, and, you know, Christmas and Easter and everything that went along there. And I, you know, feel very influenced by all three. So it was kind of it was a buffet for me, at least. And it was, and a good one. You can kind of choose what is important. And again, going back to what we're talking about earlier, at the end of the day, it's really about celebrating, you know, the goodness and the people in our lives, and love
and family, which is so important.
Family,
I think that's something that Nikki kind of finds in the end, is she's looking for a job, or she's looking for inspiration, or she's looking for love, but ultimately she's close with her family, which is something I appreciate. And I want to talk to you about this incredible character of Sam's mother that you have here, which is, you know, we have an idea, just maybe we don't all have an idea. I have an idea from watching some Bollywood movies and from talking to my friends of what an Indian auntie is, you know, this stereotype of like meddling in the affairs and having strong opinions about marriage. But you have created in Auntie Asha, I think, a modern woman who is like goals. She's so much fun. She is independent. And I just love that we got to see another woman of an older age who's also dealing with their culture. You know, so often we see, oh, it's the young people, right, that want to be modern and do their own thing. But people have been reckoning with these things for a long time.
Totally.
So yeah, I wonder if you could talk about that character and then also maybe a little bit about Nikki's parents too.
Sure, yeah. So Sam's mom is Asha Auntie. She is like a former actor. She kind of rebelled. She is this, she smokes and she drinks and she is totally cool if Sam and Nikki share a room, which Nikki is horrified by because her mother would never.
Kind of like encourage.
Yeah. But I think for me, like, it was fun writing a modern auntie because they do exist. And I think a lot of times it's so easy, and I know that I've been guilty of this too, is to fall back on the auntie stereotype of, the older generation of women, they grew up differently. They don't support, my choices. They don't, all they care about is that I get married and have children. All they care about is, they care if I'm dark, that I tan in the summer, those things. But the truth is a lot of them aren't like that. And they do have these, I'm sure, very, these histories that we probably don't know about or will never know about, and their own, the own way of handling things. And so I wanted to write an auntie that was different than a lot of the aunties that I'd seen written about and a lot of aunties I'd written about before. So that was really, really fun. As terms of Nikki's parents, I love Nikki's parents. I think that, again, in my 3 previous books, although the parent characters were all they were often a huge source of tension for the protagonist, in the obstacle of them, really living out their life or or really being in love with who they wanted to love. Whereas I consciously wanted to write parents that were really, really supportive, because those do exist as well. Like my parents are very much like Nikki's parents. And a lot of Nikki's journey is ultimately feeling that, yes, her parents are a little strict, and yes, they did want her to be a good Indian girl, but a lot of Nikki's own, a lot of Nikki's sense of having to be good, of having to do the right thing, came from herself. And then she was projecting that onto her parents. And so, yeah, I really love Nikki's parents. And I like that I'm going to be coming back to them for my next romance when I write Jasmine's story, her sister's story, because I think there's a lot to explore there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love seeing that too. And I think, especially when we're writing stories, immigrant stories, generational stories, it's very easy to fall back on like parents say no, child says yes. So it was very refreshing. And I like to hear that it was like a kind of a deliberate effort to make her parents so loving, so enthusiastic. I was also obsessed with them. I loved you included this detail of her, they wait up for her to come home. I always do that still when I visit my parents for Thanksgiving. If I go out with friends, I'm always just saying, hi, I'm safe. That was so familiar to me. So familiar to me. So I thought that was really refreshing. And if you're comfortable, we can take a second to talk about Jasmine, because not only, we have a Holly Jolly Diwali featuring Nikki, but there's another book coming with her older sister, who is such a fun character. Could you tell us a little bit about Jasmine?
Sure. So Jasmine is Nikki's older sister, and they are kind of polar opposites. And part of Nikki's whole journey is realizing and sort of confronting the fact that she's always felt like she had to be good as well, because her sister was such a rebel and disappointed her parents so much. And yes, Nikki's parents are modern now, but part of that reason was because Jasmine really pushed their parents and had to learn to accept her for all of her ways. So in the story, Jasmine, Nikki and Jasmine have a falling out, but of course we always reconcile with our sisters. And so the next book will feature Jasmine, and I don't want to spoil, but it's essentially more of her journey of finding herself and also falling in love and learning how to open herself up to these kinds of relationships.
Yeah, I found Jasmine to be very relatable. I'm also an older sister. And so it was funny to see the older sister and the younger sister dynamic. And oftentimes when one sibling goes one way, the other sibling feels like they need to compensate, to balance themselves out.
Totally.
So I think that Jasmine's a really interesting character. Do you have a title for this new book?
I don't. I do not.
We will wait eagerly.
Yeah. I have a Word doc brainstorming, but nothing good yet.
Well, I know everybody on our social pages and in comments is so complimentary of the title for A Holly Jolly Diwali. So it's going to be a hard one to beat, but I'm sure that you'll be able to figure out some other things too. And since we have you here too, Sonya, I was wondering if you could talk about some of your other books. I was like a big fan of Serena Singh Flips the Script.
Oh,
but
sure, yeah. So yeah, my most recent book was published in February, and that was called Serena Singh Flips the Script. It took place in DC, and that one was more on the women's fiction side, although it also does, like, romance does play a big part in it. And that one I wrote, it was really fun to write because it was writing a character so different than me. Nikki, I think, is a lot similar to me, whereas Serena, you know, she has a neck tattoo. She's a rebel. She doesn't apologize for herself. She totally knows what she wants. She's she is a boss woman. You know, she has a creative director at an agency, and she also does not want to get married and have children. And she's very, very certain about this. She does not change her mind during the show. During the book, but she also realizes that being so determined and believing that any sort of vulnerability to anybody is a weakness and would, you know, stop her from achieving what she wanted. She really has to learn how to open herself up to, you know, to reconnecting with her family, with her, you know, friends, realizing she doesn't have a lot of friends anymore because and finding friendships, and also with love and understanding that, you know what, yes, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have children, but I do maybe want a partner. I do want to be vulnerable and share my life with someone, and that's okay. And so it's kind of accepting that. That's the story.
Yeah, folks, I would really check that book out. I also think it encapsulates perfectly this sort of millennial conundrum that a lot of like my peers are struggling with the same issue of like being that boss lady, having your independence, also have a vulnerable side. So I think it's really well done. And I'm curious to know, because I'm working on a character very different than me right now, but would you say it was easier or harder to be, do you think the distance is helpful or hindering in terms of how easy it is to write?
I think writing Serena Singh was harder in the sense that, you know, when I was revising, I'd have to be careful and be like, okay, well, is that what really this character would do? Or am I slipping back and this character is saying something or responding to something the way that I would? Because I am different. Like, I do, like, Serena is my role model in a way that, you know, like, she has a tattoo on her neck. I wasn't bold enough. I just got a tattoo on my wrist. Like, I wish I could have had the bravery.
I don't have any tattoos, so you are both my inspo.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that was definitely like just making sure to stick to that mindset, because, you know, we're all so different and we all make such different choices, and really thinking of, critically about, okay, well, how would this person respond versus how would I respond?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best things about reading is like putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and thinking, why might they make a decision? I kept thinking, because I'm also a good girl, very much like Nikki and perhaps like yourself, when she kept delaying her trip to visit Punjab to see her relatives. I was like, oh no, they're going to be so mad if she cancels. I felt so much guilt for her connecting with her roots. I was like, you gotta go. But she what she wanted, which is a sign of really great character development for sure. And what's your writing life like now, Sonya? Like, I guess the pandemic isn't ending, but I always love to know process. Are you a morning person? Are you a pantser or a plotter? You're not in your office right now, I guess. So
I'm at my parents' house, for Canadian Thanksgiving. But I'm a plotter, and I do find, and I've become more of a plotter every time, and I really find that helpful for me because it's less revising, at least in my experience, and it's helpful to know where I need my characters to end up. And I also just have, like, sometimes I'll have really random ideas for like a piece of dialogue or like a little vignette or a scene. And if I can say, okay, that's going to fit here, I can just kind of file these little ideas and these, like, maybe a joke or something away. And then by the time I get to writing that scene, I won't have forgotten about it. And you know, so that's really helpful to me. I am also a binger. I'm not somebody who has a regular schedule, especially for when I was working full time. I just had to write where I could and when I could. Whereas, you know, I've sort of had like a more challenging family year, so I haven't been writing as much. But again, it's more of like, okay, when I do have the time, I just have to go for it. And sometimes I go for it for so long that my arm, I need an ice pack for my arm.
Oh my gosh!
But then I might not write for, you know, a month. So it's I'm very stop start.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I think, you know, in my other career, I'm also coaching people working on their own books. And I know we have a lot of writers listening. There's this idea, right, in MFA programs where they tell you writers write every day, right? And I think that pressure makes a lot of people feel like, well, that's just not tenable for me because I'm working a full-time job, or I'm a mom, or I have other responsibilities. So I think it's really nice to hear, like, I think it's more about the quality than the quantity, right? And if you can find that meaningful time, then it still works out. Yeah.
And I think everybody's different. Like, I think maybe for some people to keep up the momentum, and I've heard people, oh, just 10 minutes a day in the car, like before you get work, whatever it is. And that definitely does work for some people. But for others, it's like, you know what, I really don't have 10 minutes. Or when I do have 10 minutes, my head is elsewhere because I'm stressing about all the things I need to do. So, and then if you're not able to be consistent every day, can be so discouraging, you know?
Totally. People really beat themselves up if they missed a day for totally normal things like a doctor's appointment or a family emergency or dinner with friends.
Yeah. And then it's easy to just stop altogether versus just giving yourself time and then going back to it when you can. I think this is the same psychology of why, you know, they say maybe sometimes diets don't work, right? It's because you do something so perfectly, and then if you slip up, it's like, okay, well, I'm done. It's like, no, well, we just had like, try again when we can try again next, you know, and that's okay.
I think that's really, really smart and good advice. So seems like it's worked out well too. And I'd love to ask too about your relationship to romance. Your background's like always been interesting to me because I've been following you for a while, but how did you find like the rom-com space? Because, you know, you have a more like academic background, you studied creative writing. Did you always know you wanted to do rom-coms, or did you discover this?
Well, I didn't really actually think about genre until I was done my first book. I think, you know, we all come from such different places, readers, right? Like, I read a lot of romance and women's fiction, but I also read a lot of other books. And so, and, you know, and I hate the snobbery. I think like everybody here, like, hate the snobbery about romance. Like, a good book is a good book. It does not matter what the genre is, right?
Totally.
So I always just thought of books as, okay, that's a good book. That's a good book. And so when I started writing the Matchmaker's List, I just started writing a story without really thinking about the genre. And then later, you know, once, you know, I was like, okay, it's going to be published. Then I actually had to make edits and to sort of rethink of the story and to kind of shape it within the expectations of the genre and to make it better and to make it a better romance. And so, so I write romance and women's fiction. My first book and Diwali are labeled romance, where my other two books are labeled women's fiction. But often I think genre is so fluid, right? Like I said, a good book is a good book.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, this show, Lit Chick, we're always speaking to female identifying authors and looking at beach reads in women's fiction. But yes, the genre thing, I think, is fluid and it is porous. And it's also great to hear, again, so many different perspectives. Some people know that they're starting, you know, right off the bat, I'm writing a, you know, friends to lovers romance in this genre with these tropes. But you can also kind of discover it as you go along. And on that note, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's something that, you know, as I'm now understanding more about genre, I am making those conscious decisions now. So for Jasmine's book, I can give a teaser that it is an enemies to lovers romance. I think, at least it is right now. It might change, but.
Well, if they're enemies right now, then maybe that's important.
Well, at least, you know, they strongly dislike each other.
Okay, cool. I have a question about that. I'll ask you off air. That's going to be a spoiler because I know Jasmine is with somebody in a Holly Jolly Diwali. So you read widely. I'm curious. What are you reading right now? Any book recs, or you're deep in the writing hole?
So right now, and I think I'm right. She was on the show last week. The Matzo Ball, Jean Meltzer's book.
Yes, we love Jean.
I love Uzma Jalaluddin's books, like Hannah Khan Carries On and Aisha at Last. And last night I just finished a thriller, One by One by Ruth Ware. That was really good. It was
I love Ruth Ware.
Yeah, I mean, her books, everything is just, so that was really, really enticing. And I was up really late finishing that. And then another book that I read this year that I loved is The Committed by Viet Thanh Nguyen. It's the sequel to The Sympathizer. And it's sort of this really, that's more on my, like a literary book, but it's this really like great voice, so funny about, I'm not going to say what it's about because it's I don't want to spoil anything, and I can't remember what's on the copy, but it's really great. And apparently it's being turned into a movie with Robert Downey Jr. So,
oh my gosh, huge. Yeah. I love The Sympathizer, and I love that you say that he's funny too. I think a lot of people think of that book as being so, it's got a lot of violence and sadness in it too, but he's a very humorous writer as well. So
very, very dry and very funny. Yeah.
I love that snark. And I love that you're reading thrillers. I know you write thrillers too. And I think I'm getting to the point in the pandemic where I'm slowly able to return to thrillers. Maybe it's also like the fact that it's spooky season and I'm like, okay. For a while, I really couldn't watch any of stuff because things that were going on in the world were too wild. But getting back to thrillers and stuff on my bucket list. So that's a really great recommendation. All right. Do we have any questions from the audience? I don't know if we have got lots of folks commenting on the title, loving your perspective about writing processes. I know folks always love to hear about that stuff. That's really great. So where can people buy Holly Jolly Diwali? I know you mentioned an independent bookstore, which we always really love to support on the Blaze. And we had a couple comments in the chat and last week about the holiday books being so early for Blaze, but I want to remind people there are actual supply chain issues happening with these bookstores. So if you are thinking about Christmas gifts, it is not too early. Grab those copies, stash them in your closet.
Never too early.
Never too early. Yeah, exactly.
So you can buy at East City Bookshops in DC. And I believe I had my launch there earlier this week, and I believe there might still be signed copies available to order online.
Okay, great. Yeah,
they're a great store.
Totally. A perfect gift for truly anyone. I mean, it's got so much music, so much food, travel. Oh, I think we've got a question in the comment section. I don't know if we can put that up on the screen. There we go. What is your favorite part of being an author? It's a great question, Mark. What do you absolutely look forward to most in the entire cycle of writing and then publishing a book? That's a great, very joyful, very Diwali question.
Yeah. Well, I really love, this time when the book comes out and I get to talk to people about it. And, I think that until recently, I think a lot of us often didn't see ourselves in the books we read, and it's starting to change now. So I think, getting DMs sometimes from typically South Asian women who have their story really resonate, and say, oh my God, you wrote my memoir. This is exactly my mom, or this is exactly me. And that's really nice because, that's very heartwarming to think that you're maybe in some way, somebody reading my book might be inspired to live and love more freely, or to stand up for what they want, or to write a book themselves, who in turn will represent more people. That's really great. But then the other thing is, I really love also just the writing the first draft and that time when nobody has read it and it's just like yours. And you're in the sort of, like I told you, like there's an ice pack on my arm, but I can't stop writing. That when you're in that flow, that is a very sort of joyful experience as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Reaching that zone is like part of why we write, I think. And what you said about not showing it to anybody else is also refreshing. I feel like that's the tricky part of publishing, at least, as opposed to writing privately, is it's like your own special secret. And then once it gets out, it becomes everybody's special secret, and everyone sort of takes ownership over it in a different way. Talking about these characters that existed in your head for so long. So I completely understand that perspective too. And there's a character in the book I'm just realizing now that we're kind of close to the end that we haven't talked about yet, who is Raj, who's our doctor from Seattle. So I love also, if you're looking for a wide variety of people, this book really has everything. I think he is an example of a more maybe traditional kind of Indian guy. And I just love the contrast too.
Yeah.
And I also love, there's a little bit of Bollywood in these books. And I wanted to ask you, because I'm somebody who's like sort of dabbling with Bollywood recently. And you have this actor. Could you tell us a little bit about the actor that's featured in the book? And also if you have any recommendations for like where to get started. Would love to know.
So there is a character, a real life actor who is talked to. I won't spoil anything. His name is Shah Rukh Khan, and he is, at least to me, I would say one of the most prolific actors within Bollywood. And it feels like every movie, at least at some point, was where he was in. And he's been playing the leading man for what, 30, since I was a kid, he was leading man off, and he's still the leading man, even though he's much older. And he's great. I love his movies. I think if you're looking to get into Bollywood, a lot of the and I'm totally biased here because I was like a little kid in the 90s. I loved Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, which has Shah Rukh Khan in it. I will say that not everything is aged super well, but Kuch Kuch Hota Hai has
for a lot of
Shah Rukh Khan, and that is if you go onto Netflix, probably all these early Shah Rukh Khan movies will be on there, and they're very wholesome and sweet. And then the other movie I would really recommend, and I believe this is on Netflix, is one with Priyanka Chopra, who obviously has like one of the first I'm not sure, but to really make it as well over in Hollywood. And her book is called Dil Darkda Do, I think I want to say. Look up Priyanka Chopra and then DIL. That would be the first word. And it's this amazing story that's just not typical Bollywood. There's not a lot of over-the-top dance numbers, but it's just this really good story about a family that's kind of falling apart, and they go on this trip together. And she is amazing. The movie is amazing. So I'd really recommend that one.
Well, I'm going to cue this up tonight just to keep the Indian thing. I love it. I mean, it's interesting too to see the intersection of like this Indian rom-com and Bollywood. It's a tradition that's been a part of the country for so long, to have these over the top sort of like boy is this way and then girl is this way, and they come together, and over the top is perfect. I mean, and then this book, I won't say that this book is over the top, but I do think, unlike Serena saying, we're in the holiday season. So we have big parties, big dresses, great food. It definitely has a little more glam, and I think that makes it stick out. And also just makes it the perfect gift because it's like glittery and shimmery and all of those things. I love Nikki wears this yellow sari to, I think, the first party of the wedding.
It's on the cover of the book. This scene, it actually happens.
I love it.
So it is very glittery.
I know. It's like the cover makes so much sense once you finish Act 1. You're like, But yes, I had a lot of kind of inspo. I was constantly, and I wonder whether you did this for this too, I was constantly on Instagram, like looking up locations, looking up the references. So colorful. So very well done there. We're wrapping up, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got more holiday books coming your way. We will have Jenny Bayless, author of A Season for Second Chances, on next week to keep our holiday spirit glowing. And I'm so glad that we've had Sonya Lalli on today. Please check out all of her books, not just A Holly Jolly Diwali. Follow on social media. I think we can post those socials too for great updates. I love following you on Instagram, Sonya. I've been doing so for a while. That video of you and your husband dancing, I have to tell you this. I showed this to my fiance last night. I was like, look how cute. They like did this coordinated dance. And he was like,
it was a surprise.
Yes, which is
Oh,
brilliant. Big dance at your wedding. And I showed it to him and I was like, yeah, like, let's do this, right? And he was like, I don't know. But the campaign to do the Sonya Lalli coordinated dance move at your wedding starts today. And I will
Good luck. I fully support this. I will say it took my husband, who is not South Asian, to about 6 months to learn that dance. So
Yeah.
it was a lot of dedication.
Yeah, I know. Jacob has 2 left feet, so it would be a real. It's never going to look like you want it to, like in your mind. But I think the fact that he gave it an effort is like a great sign that he's a keeper. So that's super important. But thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend. Keep reading, keep buying books, and keep tuning into A Mighty Blaze for more of these exclusive interviews. Thank you again to Sonya, and thank you for everybody for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.